and gentlemen, it's 5 o'clock, and I think we should begin our city planning meeting. I want to welcome each one of you and those who are watching this particular council meeting. I want to also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. I recognize the value of the continuing Aboriginal knowledge and cultural practice, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and future. Present here at the meeting, we have Alderman Mani Zuko, Councillor John Kelly, Alderman Louise Bloomfield, Councillor Ben Loberger, Councillor and Lord Mayor Anna Reynolds, Councillor Ryan Pasalt, and Councillor Louise Elliott, and Councillor Dr. Zelinda Sherlock, and Councillor Bill Harvey, and I'm Mike Dutta. Apologies and leave of absence. We have one apology from Councillor Will Coates, and I would take the liberty to maybe also note the absence of our Deputy Lord Mayor, Helen Bennett, who has been elected to the Parliament, and we congratulate her for her success. And it is my understanding that she has resigned, but it hasn't been formally, I haven't been formally informed, but that's my understanding. So we want to thank her for all the contribution and the work she was able to contribute towards, and especially her role here as the former chair of the Planning Committee. Confirmation of minutes. Someone would like to move? Moved by Councillor Ben Loberger. All those in favour say aye. Those against, carried unanimously. 2, consideration of supplementary items. Any? No. Number 3, indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. No. Number 4, transfer of agenda items. No. Number 5, Planning Authority has some consideration of items with deputation. We have 6.11. We have Phil Gartrell from representing here, just to answer questions for the applicant. And we also have Scott Palmforth from the UDAP. And so thank you for coming. He's here also if there are questions and clarifications that you would like to have. And we also have 6.1.3, the applicant Paul Jacobs is here with us as well. Committee acting as planning authority under the provisions of Rule 25 of the Local Government Meeting Procedures. We act as the planning authority. 6.1.1, 20 Barrack Street. Now, Councillor Bill Harvey.
Chair, do we have a Choi fly through?
Through Chair, no, we don't. I'm sorry. There are, sorry Chair, if I can,
yes.
Through you, there are various renders, so photo montage for the committee to see. They are at page 704.
704.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to move the item to get us started per the officer recommendation for approval.
And look, I'll jump in now. I can't.
Lord Mayor had a hand, sorry.
So I just want to clarify why we weren't doing Pavio Street first.
I have been notified that Scott is here and he has a meeting to attend to after this, so that's why we are leaving things as it is.
Okay,
yeah.
No worries.
If he didn't have a commitment, we would then change things around.
Yeah, so I don't know whether before we get into debate we want to hear from the Urban Design Panel Chair, but I did request, because I read their advice and was interested in to hear a bit more directly from the Chair about some of their observations. So I don't know whether that's appropriate for us to maybe hear from Scott and see if there's anyone's got any questions before we get into debate.
I'm quite happy if the elected members are happy with that particular format. Remember, I mentioned that he's here to answer any questions or if there are any comments. But Scott, if you're happy to do that, we'll appreciate. Thank you. Please.
And Phil's not here, isn't he? Phil is here. Phil go. Ah, okay. So I don't know who should go first. Maybe Phil should go first.
Phil is only here to answer questions, I understand.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, and through the chair, thanks for the opportunity, Karen.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just ask you to bring the microphone close to your thank you.
Okay. Yeah, look, I'm primarily here to answer any questions that came up. We saw this particular application as a pre-application February last year. At that time, I think it's important to understand the context of the pre-applications, the level of information you could be provided can be quite light or quite developed. This one was probably more on the developed side, but the panel's comments were definitely aimed at encouraging some changes to come about, which I think the panel's comments were quite clear in that. I think on review of the application that's been submitted, the changes are relatively little compared to some of the ones we were expecting. But we've had no further sight of it since last year.
Can I just ask, I guess through your chair, just in summary, what, because I found some of the terminology in your report a little bit architectural speak.
Yeah.
What are your main concerns
Yeah, through your chair, I agree. There was a lot of architectural speak, and I think particularly with the pre-app, it's very much a dialogue back to the applicant, who are very good architects, and at that stage had promised that this was only really an initial presentation, they'd develop it further. I think overall, the length of the site that they've got available, which is currently the car showroom, the generation of that just simply taken up and very flat in the way they've responded to it. There's quite a significant fall over the site. There is a difference to the outlook onto Macquarie Street, onto Barrack Street, and then onto the north behind, down over the rivulet. So it's probably the symmetrical way they'd gone about massing it. Everything was divided down the middle and duplicated. There's no difference in how the building sits to Macquarie Street versus a very steep street in Barrack Street. And they've essentially taken a dominant line. Now, where we saw it, there was an awning along Macquarie Street. That awning's largely been removed except for the two projecting elements. UDAP's comments were primarily seeking or suggesting the project had some more verticality in its breakup. When it was presented to us, it was very much done in the sense that it was two towers. UDAP had made the comment that it was actually, you can see on the floor plans, it's one large building, but they were seeking to articulate it as two towers by changing the colours in between, or the materials in between. That continues. It was still in the current application. It still is very much reliant upon a material change and the quality of materials inherent to maintain a respectful presence, I suppose, in the street, rather than a building that carries a very long, big mass and bulk to it. UDAP did not have any issue with the height as a height limit, per se, but it was more the bulk and its presence on Macquarie Street. And generally, when we saw it, the applicant hadn't really done a lot of work in relation to looking more broadly up and down the street, understanding the pattern of development that goes from the upper end of Macquarie Street down into the CBD, which this is very much a landmark site, and we're very keen for it to be a really strong landmark building.
Yeah. So is there anything that could be conditioned in? There was stuff about the awning that I didn't quite understand. Did you guys like the awning? You didn't like the awning?
When they originally presented in pre-app the awning, it was it probably didn't provide enough cover for the pedestrians on the street. It was very high. It was very shallow off the street from memory, and it turned around on the same level onto Barrack Street. So the UDAP made the sort of comment that in particular the way Barrack Street falls away significantly, the awning was of no use at all. I think in the sort of comments, the UDAP made the suggestion that they could sort of simply treat the awning to Macquarie Street, but then sort of look at it in providing more pedestrian amenity. That's subsequently in the revised scheme been removed. They have got I suppose a cloister for half the building, sort of on the upper end, where sort of people can get in under sort of some shade and shelter from sort of rain and things, but that's very much sort of within the envelope of the building, I would suggest. So back when we saw it, the awning was very strong and consistent from one end of the site to the other. It provided a really strong, long line. It's a very long building when you consider sort of the overall site width. And UDAP's comments were seeking to sort of break that up in some way. They've sought to break that up by removing the awning and pulling some entry canopies out. I can't speak on behalf of the entire UDAP panel on what we would have commented on this current version. Yeah.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Anyone else? I just have one question, Scott. In the reading, it was mentioned about verticality and horizontality and also symmetry. Now, would you agree that these matters, these elements are not part of the planning scheme?
Yes, I would. I suppose UDAP's comments are in relation to the matters that aren't necessarily within the planning scheme and how they sort of contribute to items that are in the planning scheme, such as streetscape and townscape. That tends to be where our advice is sought in terms of interpreting the parts that aren't defined in the planning scheme but come up in a discussion of whether something is appropriate to streetscape, townscape and aspects like that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor John Kelly.
Scott, you touched on the awning situation, and it's interesting, we had a bit of a conversation the other night on an awning, and the philosophy, just briefly, with the way you think of these awnings, and that, of course it's preferable to have some shade and shelter, I get that, but is there any sort of guiding principle there you sort of have, and does that as the Chair said, does that come into the planning scheme as such, or not really?
No, through you, Chair, no, I would say that UDAP is not driving whether there is or isn't an awning. It was commenting on the awning presented at that time, which was very high. And then as the site falls away and the awning kept the same height, by the time it got to the corner, it was essentially not going to provide any relief or any sort of amenity to the pedestrian in the street, and that was exacerbated when it turned around the corner. Again, I think UDAP's role is to sort of comment on the design as presented, to understand whether that is going to provide pedestrian amenity or whether it's a visual effect. We're not there to sort of suggest the design is one way or another. We're commenting on what's presented to us. Yeah.
Any other questions? Any other comments?
Yeah,
Lord Mayor.
just a couple more questions if I can. So, I mean, the message of the report was that UDAP doesn't support the proposal, which seems like quite a strong recommendation. And is that, I mean, that's quite unusual. I mean, UDAP doesn't do that all the time. And, you know, I'm just wondering, is that really just because it's bulky and it sits close to the Camilla building? Is that right? So obviously, on the others, just down the road, you've got these two big new hotels that are bulky and much taller as well. So.
Through you, Chair, I repeat that I think we made comments around whether we would likely, support it or otherwise back in a pre-app stage. I can't speak for what UDAP would have said had it seen it under the formal application, when our ability to make comment is very much stringent upon the sort of specific development application aspects. Back under a sort of pre-app, I can sort of support that there was a unanimous sense of the comments that we were sort of making, and there was a general sort of desire for it to undergo some changes that we were recommending. I don't think per se it's the bulk adjacent to the Camelot, the old Hutchins School. I think if anything, it's not really embracing that in a sort of a streetscape sense. It's just having the sort of the building turn the corner and then turn the corner again. I don't think there's any sort of, likewise in relation to the heritage building on the sort of the top side, our comments at that stage were to support something that considered the location adjacent to that heritage building, but essentially it steps back from that. It's not something that I think UDAP would make a recommendation against solely on the relationship to the heritage buildings next door. It's probably the bulk and the symmetry adds to that reading of the bulk in the sort of the larger townscape and streetscape. Coming down Macquarie Street, where this is street and the buildings themselves are stepping down. The heritage building that you talk about in Camelot has sort of a very nice formal setback to the garden, so it's got its own streetscape character. And this, as the report shows, does start adding to that building up of scale to then get to the larger buildings on the other side of Camelot. So in terms of that overall, it's probably the uniformity of it for such a long building, and the symmetry just adds to that strength of presence. And particularly when viewed from across the valley looking back towards the Barrack Street Hill. And I know there was a lot of probably, again, complexity about that in terms of what one should or shouldn't see. But I suppose UDAP was suggesting that a slightly more vertical emphasis would just allow it to sit and be responsive to how you read the other buildings further down, which have a verticality to them, not this low horizontal heaviness.
And is there anything at all that could be conditioned to reflect some of these issues, or do you ever get asked about conditions that could be added to approvals?
Yeah, through you, Chair, yes, we do. It's very much part of the process to do that, but particularly when we're looking at something that's been presented under a development application. So again, when we were looking at this, the sort of pre-app, I don't think it's usual to be asked. Sometimes through the sort of the planning officer at present that might say, if this was going to go, what type of conditions would you suggest? But it's very much something that's more done when we're looking at development application assessments.
I guess it's a bit late now to ask you if there's any conditions.
That would something I think formally under UDAP would have to sort of comment on. Yeah.
Any other questions? Councillor Harvey.
Scott, in the version you saw and commented on, did that have the outdoor dining terrace area, that alfresco area?
Through you, Chair, the one between the two upper buildings?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Didn't have the landscaping detail in. I checked today. The floor plans were essentially the same. Okay.
So does that have the veranda over it, or is there no veranda at that point? Because I was just thinking from a light perspective.
Sorry, through you, Chair. You're talking about the one on the ground floor?
The ground floor terrace.
Restaurant
area. So that's why I was thinking, is a veranda relevant because you want all that light to come into the terrace?
Yeah, through you, Chair. I don't think at a pre-app it had the level of detail suggesting it was going to be used as an outdoor terrace. I recall there was a setback there, a covered space. I don't think UDAP sort of made any specific comment regard to that because we weren't really sort of asked to comment on that particular function.
Yep. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any other comments? No? Thank you. Thank you very much, Scott, for your contribution. And Phil, would you like to respond to anything that was said by Scott? Please.
All right, thank you. Just in response to some of the comments and questions, the UDAP comments that were provided when the application did go to UDAP originally did raise all of the issues that Mr. Barnforth has just mentioned. Following that, the full length awning that was discussed, that was removed from the proposal, and we sought to implement some additional awnings, but at a reduced scale and broken up along the facade to still provide some weather protection for the entrances to the building, but to take away that sort of awning that was quite dominant at that time. So that was modified. The centre of the building along Macquarie Street between the two podiums, that design was also modified somewhat to actually change the exterior finishes, and we introduced the additional landscaping as well to break down that horizontality, and that's also been achieved through the articulation and the choice of external materials and the exterior framing of the building as well. There was also some comments around further detail should be provided around the understanding the building in the context of the townscape. As part of the application package that you have before you, we do have a number of detailed long sections and elevations that show that broader context within the townscape and that relationship to Barracks Hill, West Hobart, and the basin and the montages are particularly useful in understanding the exterior materiality and how that assists to break down the overall massing and appearance of the building. We've used quite a number of lighter materials and variations that do assist in blending the proposal into the wider townscape. I think the montage looking at the proposal from the corner of Barrack Street and Collins Street probably articulates that best. There's another one from further up Barrack Street as well, with the corner of Bathurst Street, I believe, that also shows how the building sits within that broader context with Barracks Hill behind. Just in terms of setbacks and trying to provide an additional sort of response to that topographic change from the ridge down to Collins Street, the site is quite narrow, and there is a requirement at the moment from the current owner and operator standpoint to keep the existing service centre operational. So there was quite a lot of detail that went into making sure that this additional lot created could be done so and the development could proceed without impacting those operations. So we were sort of restricted in the amount of land that we had to use. However, we have implemented significant setbacks, in my view, to all of the levels as the building progresses up. We do have recessed balconies and so forth, and then the external framing, which creates some depth to the facade as well. That is probably all of the comments I'd like to raise, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Harvey and then Councillor Passol.
Yeah, a couple of questions with regard to the service area. Could you walk me through how the waste management system is going to work?
My understanding of the waste management system is that will be a private contractor will undertake that. The truck will come in from Macquarie Street. So Macquarie Street is the only vehicle access to the site. The truck will come in to Macquarie Street. It will stop at the entrance before going down into the basement levels. And the bins will be brought up from there, which is fairly common practice with developments that require basement level car parking. They have systems and bin trolleys and so forth that they use that are brought up that the developer provides. Bin trolleys come up, the truck gets emptied and then exit the site in a forward direction.
So they'll be dragging the bins uphill or pushing them?
Yeah, look, I'd have to double check that.
It doesn't matter dragging or pushing, but the bins have got to be moved up a slope.
They do, yeah, and that's the one of the considerations for the bin trolleys, to make sure that those gradients are going to be suitable for that to occur and not cause any issues for the waste operator.
And according to the plan here, there's 9 large bins.
Yes, that would be correct.
That's all commingled waste?
I believe so, yes.
But
so we've got the commercial tenancies and then the residences above. Generally, these types of developments, the waste contractors prefer to have sort of consolidated bins, so larger bins, so that all that waste can be put in those larger bins rather than having sort of a proliferation of smaller bins that just adds to...
So they're all landfill bins, is what I'm getting at.
Look, I would have to take that on notice and have a look, but there certainly would be an allowance for general waste and recycling.
Mm-hmm. And 32 units.
56.
Sorry, 56. Thank you.
Councillor Passol.
Sorry, one more, just to focus on the bike storage area. Is that for the businesses, for the commercial part of the building?
Again, I'd have to take that on notice. There was quite a bit of discussion early on around whether we would look at providing bike facilities for residents. So it may well be that we've provided an allocation for residents to use, and also a smaller allocation for people working in the commercial tenancies that might wish to come to the site. That was sort of born out of a requirement early on that we were only going to have parking just for the residents, but we have, I believe, in the final proposal, we've made an allocation of about 8 or 9 spaces, I believe, for the commercial tenancies as well, and then that's supported with the opportunities for bike storage.
So you've got a bike facility here, it looks like, that provides a shower and a couple of toilets?
Yeah, that's right. So there's one on the ground floor for the commercial tenancies, and that's the purpose of that. I believe we do have one on the floor below that, but I would have to double check. But the purpose of those essentially is for people working in the commercial tenancies to have somewhere to bring their bike in and have a shower before or after accessing the site.
And how do you think the building performs from a sustainability perspective?
The
Or
architects
will
have,
perform? Yep.
yeah, the architects have done a fair bit of work in that regard, and they have, I believe, provided a page in the architectural documentation that outlines a number of the elements that have gone into the design of the building to ensure a high degree of sustainability, and that's certainly something that they will be working with the relevant consultants if the application is approved and it proceeds to that detailed design phase.
Thank you. Councillor Passol.
Thank you, Mr. Gartrell. Through the chair, back to bicycle parking. I've got the numbers in front of me, so I can tell you that there is 18 total spaces with which is considered satisfactory, and there is a surplus within that, according to the scheme, of 11 spaces, which is the equivalent of 1 space for every 5 dwellings. So I'll ask the director some questions on the scheme later, but I don't feel that 1 bicycle spot for 5 spaces for 5 units in that particular location is particularly smart or going to meet residents' needs, or particularly in the interest of the city. I think that at least 1 per unit would be reasonable.
So, Councillor Passol, could you ask the question in?
Yeah, certainly. So is there any possibility of expanding the bicycle parking to include at least 1 per unit?
I believe there would be. It's worth clarifying that we do have, I believe, in those basement levels an allocation for residential storage for each apartment, and so those storage spaces have a minimum requirement in the scheme, and often residents in buildings like this, particularly on the mainland, they'll often use those storage spaces for numerous things, and that might also include storing their bike. They also have the opportunity of taking the bike upstairs with them in the lift, and a number of the apartments do have quite generous outdoor terraces and undercover areas where a bike could be stored as well. So there is some additional space in there to provide some flexibility.
Yeah. Would you consider adding further, and is it possible to add further than what is in the plan?
Look, the developer would be happy to add more bicycle parking, I believe. I would have to discuss that with them, but there'd certainly be, I believe, some opportunity to squeeze in a few more spaces if necessary.
I think that we can condition, but I'll check that with the director, but we might include an advice clause or something like that, and it would be really fantastic if you could do that. Thank you.
Lord Mayor.
I was just wondering whether you could speak to people who might be concerned or interested how this building kind of does reflect where it sits in relation to sort of its neighbours with Camilla and the sandstone pub, the sandstone Camilla, the sandstone pub, and then the little sandstone sort of Georgian kind of
Yep.
development. So it's sort of on all, you're the sort of other corner, and do you want to speak a little bit about how that has come into your design thinking, or what you're doing to kind of, you know, sit in that landscape?
Yeah, look, one of the key elements on the site is the existing sandstone wall, and I can't say that, you know, we're retaining it purely because we want to, but it's actually a requirement for us to retain it. We can't get rid of it, but we think it actually adds a really good element to the overall development, and from the very beginning there was always an intention to keep that. We feel that that does provide, with the new building on top, with the sandstone wall in front, it still continues to provide that connection to those adjoining properties. The setbacks as well, again, do allow for additional separation at those upper levels. And then you've also got the street width to the Camilla building and to the Duke Hotel. The building at, I think it's 197 Macquarie Street, the heritage officers and council's planning officer have looked at that as well, and are generally in agreement with what we've put forward in the application, in that the proposed building does provide appropriate separation distance from that building. And then again, we have the upper level setbacks as well, and so that provides a reasonable separation distance to allow that building to retain its prominence in the streetscape. The entry to the site as well is somewhat pulled back as well in that corner, and again that just allows that.
Lord Mayor, can you,
sorry,
could you just speak to the mic, please, if you don't mind?
Sorry, I think he understands my. It was just
It's just the microphone for the recording.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, so the entrance into the site from Macquarie Street, that section is somewhat pulled back due to the access and that arrangement, so again that sort of allows interpretation of that cottage at 197 Macquarie Street to remain prominent, and also just the external materiality in general. We've obviously gone for contemporary materials and so forth, but there are some colours that we've brought through, such as some sandstone colours and so forth, that again sort of try to reinforce some of those dominant colours. And also the landscaping has been quite carefully looked at as well, because there's quite a consistent amount of landscaping, particularly further up Macquarie Street, most notably on the collegiate site, and so we definitely wanted to try and bring a bit more of that into the building, particularly along Macquarie Street.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Any questions to the director? Thank you very much, Phil.
Thank
Greatly
you.
appreciate it. And Scott. Councillor Lubbock.
To the director, with regards to bicycle parking, the traffic assessment points out that there's no requirement to provide any bicycle parking for residential spaces, but there is for commercial spaces. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
I'll come back to a question without notice on that item then. But in addition to that, is it possible to condition, or would it only be an advice clause for additional bike parking in their plans?
Through you, Chair, it would need to be an advice clause. We have had similar situations where we've asked for further bike parking, but unless that can comply with Australian standards or you know, things that engineers are happy with, it can actually lead to more problems than it fixes.
Yep, so an advice clause would be appropriate if the council or planning committee was content with that. Okay, great, thank you.
Lord Mayor.
Just a couple of questions. One is our new LPS does bring bike parking in, doesn't it?
Through you, Chair, I apologise, Lord Mayor, I don't know the answer to that.
Oh, okay. All right, we'll have to find out. Okay, and yeah, just around the UDAP process, and how, you know, how such a significant and important building, one of our main streets, and those sort of things, how the UDAP process can't be brought a little bit closer to the actual DA, the final DA, to have comment on that, and also to give officers, you know, some input into any conditions to sort of tweak elements. How do, you know, is that...
Through you, Chair, we have been tweaking UDAP processes. The idea is that the earlier people come and see UDAP, particularly if it's a pre-app session, they're more flexible and open to changes, and UDAP is probably a little bit more bold and open with its comments. The idea being, from our point of view, that they would come back to us then, and an altered proposal would go back to UDAP. In hindsight, we probably would have put this one back to UDAP, and we'll keep on having those discussions with the Chair about how and when they go back to the panel again to get input on things like conditions. But certainly we're really hoping that UDAP can reach its potential by giving, you know, fairly frank advice at the start of the process when applicants are feeling a little bit more open to change.
And just more of a question just for members of the community who might be interested in watching, just around the wall, if you can explain about the fact that the wall is, that the heritage officers are really comfortable with what's happened.
Through
with the
you,
wall.
Chair, that the heritage officers have reviewed this proposal, which does include considering the demolition elements of the heritage code, and they have recommended approval. They have imposed or recommended a couple of conditions to do with not removing any more heritage material than has already been identified, and also a condition about supervision of some of the services that will go in to make sure that the wall's protected during the construction phase.
So the part of the wall will go, but
there is
part.
a minor part, as I understand it. Is there a montage of the bit that's...
Is it 1.9 metres? Yeah, 1.9 metres, I think.
Yeah, through you, Chair, yes, I think that's correct. It's fairly minor in the overall context of the wall.
Any other comments? Is there any other questions? Councillor Harvey.
Just, look, I hate to be obsessed by the waste system, but since we're going to have thousands of units in the city in the years to come, we need to come up with a system that actually facilitates, you know, separating waste. Multiply that, you know, thousands of units by very poor waste systems in these multiple residential apartments, and it's many, many thousands of tonnes of stuff that's going to go to landfill. So even here they say in the report that 8,028 litres of general and commingled recycling will come just from the commercial tenancies, and all of the other units will have access to chutes where they'll drop their waste down the chute. The general waste goes in plastic bags, and I dare say that everyone else will put their commingled recycling into a plastic bag as well, which can't be recycled. Any plastic bag that ends up at the MRF sails through to the landfill bins at the MRF, and we know that 25% of our recycling goes straight to landfill. Much of it because it's in plastic bags. So I guarantee that most of the recycling from a building like this will go to landfill, and the cost of that landfill, it's 5,000 tonnes a year of recycling goes to landfill, multiplied by $160. So it's a very expensive exercise to send recycling to landfill because people put it in plastic bags. And how you get around it, I don't know, but I'm just concerned that this 6-storey building with 56 tenancies won't cope with with recycling, and every other multi-residential building in Hobart is probably in the same category, let alone removing organic waste. Now, this is not going to affect my vote tonight. I'll be supporting this development application. However, I just need to make people aware that we need to come up with better solutions for waste management in multi-residential tenancies, because it produces a lot of organics, which produces methane in landfill. The recycling has a low probability of being recycled because it'll end up in plastic bags, and more than likely it won't be managed in a way that prevents vermin. So there's a number of issues that I have with waste management in facilities like this going forward, and we need to come up with some solutions for multi-residential tenancies, which we're not going to do tonight around the table, but I'll support this proposal. I think it looks quite attractive, fairly reasonable to the streetscape, so it has my vote of approval tonight.
Councillor Passol.
Just I know the director was looking for photos of the heritage wall. It's page 542, figure 9.2 for anyone who's looking for it.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other comments, any other questions? Just one clarification, Director, with regards to Councillor Passol's advice that he wanted to add about the bicycles. Would that be included in there?
Yes, Chair. I think we could include an advice clause which says the developer is encouraged to include further bike parking which complies with relevant standards, something along those lines.
Is that okay? All right. Now, if there's no other questions, no other comments, no other debate, I'm going to put that recommend. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Passol, okay.
No, thank you. I think these, thank you, Chair. These developments are worth talking to a little. You know, we have a housing crisis in Hobart, and these types of developments are what we need to solve that. And it's not just to solve the housing crisis. It also goes to emissions, having centrally located living, and close commutes where transport emissions make up about 50% of the city's emissions, I understand, and if everyone's walking, that's zero. So that's great. So this is a really great development. It is slightly disappointing that the developer didn't work as closely with UDAP as perhaps some elected members would like. However, it's still a pretty good result. I think it's quite a appealing and attractive building, and I think that sited on Macquarie Street, being the very, very busy street that it is, just up the road from two brand new hotels of even larger size, I think it's appropriate. So, you know, I do think that it's important to point out that this is really good for Hobart, that the design has met all of the conditions required per the planning scheme. The architects have done a good job. And again, it demonstrates that Hobart Council is open for business. Please come here, please put in your development applications. We want to see these types of developments come before this committee for assessment.
Thank you. Councillor Schiller.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I won't repeat what Councillor Posselt has said, but I do also agree with much of what he said, and I did like the fact that when he said the deputation, he went through some of the things that were of concern to me, which was the awning had been modified, and he was talking about the centre between the two podiums, that it had also been modified to include landscape, and when we talked, and he spoke about the breakdown of the horizontality that I think some of us were probably concerned about within the UDAP report. I also did like the fact that in relation to the landscape, he'd outlined for us that they will be using lighter materials, and setbacks have been accounted for in terms of recessing the balconies and the external frames. So yeah, overall I will also be supporting this, and I think it's actually a great outcome. Thank you.
I put the recommendation as moved. All in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll move on to 6.1.3. And we have the applicants here with us, Paul Jacobs. Would you like to come to the mic up the front? And you have 5 minutes. And then we've got about 30 seconds to go. I'll let you know.
Thank you very much. In respect of our planning application, we've tried really hard to meet the officer's concerns. We have employed architects to design the fence. I've personally collected untold number of bricks and cleaned them all. My wife did not like. I've lowered the fence height once before we even put in the application because of concerns in respect of the fence height. We then again lowered it after discussions with the planning officials. We've undertaken street photography, we've consulted a heritage expert as well, and we've provided all of our advice on an open basis to the council planning department. So that sort of is in respect of the compromises we've sought to offer. In respect of heritage, the council's heritage officers didn't object to the fence, despite the area being heritage precinct. Indeed, we were told by a heritage consultant and verbally by the council's heritage officers that the design was appropriate and would be the most heritage-friendly fence in the area. In terms of community support, there weren't any objections by neighbours or anyone else. Indeed, having been given notice by the planning department of this hearing yesterday, we managed over the course of last night to obtain statements in support of our application from a number of neighbours whom we were able to contact on relatively short notice. Our neighbours' reaction to the proposed design was universally positive. That's in respect of community support. Consistency with existing fences in the area. As stated in the streetscape analysis and the Heritage Officer's own reports, there are numerous examples of both solid fences nearby, including 21 and 27 Pavia Street, and much taller fences, including 8 Sunnyside Road, 9, 13, 19, 21 and 23 Pavia Street. The proposed fence that we're planning and seeking approval for is significantly lower than the current hedge by almost 1 metre or more in certain areas. You can see this in the images at sections 2.3, 2.4 and 2.5, which show the current state of, can only be described as a very scraggly, unattractive hedge. And section 3.3, which by contrast shows the increased passive surveillance that will be achieved by the proposed design, which will significantly improve the current situation with the existing hedge. The proposed fence would look, in our architects and my own personal opinion, far superior. It'd be safer for the occupants, which include my 5-year-old and 7-year-old child and my dog. And pedestrians would have easier egress along Pavia and Sunnyside Street, and would be better able to appreciate what I think is wonderful Hobartian architecture of our place. In terms of that's with consistency with existing fences. Passive surveillance. The planning report references passive surveillance as the critical aspect of the planning department's decision. We argue here it's almost no passive surveillance of the street now due to the 2.5 metre hedge. Our fence design does offer a solution to this, we believe. Once replaced, the elevated position of our house combined with the dips in the fence design will provide much greater passive surveillance and showcase the heritage aspects of the home, and we hope be in keeping with the spirit of the Federation era architecture. These concepts are illustrated in figures 7 and 8 on page 11 of the planner's report. In respect of options to lower the fence, we would rather not, because that would allow our dog to escape potentially. It is a jumper. The option of adding a transparent element to a lower brick fence would, in our opinion and that of the heritage expert and architect, be aesthetically very displeasing and significantly detract from the attractiveness of both our home and the street. And in conclusion, all of those are the material points I wanted to cover today. Our arguments, I'd like to think, were obvious, as are the benefits of the proposed design set out in the planning department's own reports and images. Essentially, we consider ourselves stewards of part of Hobart's history. We think we're very lucky to live where we do, and we're attempting to maintain, restore where we can, and we acknowledge the importance of the heritage aspect of it. We like to think we have a beautiful house. We'd love to have a fence that can match it. So thank you for your time and consideration. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor
Thank you.
Passault and then Councillor Luberger.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I understand that to be compliant with the scheme, completely compliant, and I hear your comments about the hedge, that you would need to drop 2 courses of bricks. How do you feel about dropping 1 to meet us halfway?
We've already dropped 2, and
Yep.
my understanding is that wouldn't render it compliant. That would just be the exercise of power that the planners would be willing to agree to. There's still, I mean, at this point, it's discretionary. It was my understanding. So we'd rather maintain. We've dropped 2 already. So
Yep. So if it was a choice between refusal and dropping by 1 course, what would you choose?
I would have to speak to my architects. Unfortunately, given we were given notice of this yesterday, I've been unable to contact either my heritage or architect and have any meaningful discussion. My heritage person's currently travelling, I don't know where, and my architect's in Melbourne. But I have sought. I tried to see, they quote unquote like the architectural language. I think that means the dimensions. I personally prefer, I like the dimensions, but...
Well, have a think about that and listen to the debate, and if you have a change or you want to give a firm answer to that later on, please speak up.
Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. Thank you, Mr Jacobs, for coming in. I just wanted to clear up the passive surveillance issue and just get some really plain information about it. How tall is your hedge?
It's between, I would say, at its lowest point probably 2.3 and its highest point probably 2.7.
2.3 to 2.7, and how tall is the proposed fence?
The lowest points, at the lowest points I believe it's about 1.6 or 1.7, and then it goes up. I mean, I can sort of show you roughly. Our place isn't as grand as this, but this is the sort of look that we're going for. The reason we didn't put in the sandstone, 1, because I can't afford it, and 2, because it's not as old as this is. So Federation, they sort of reduced it, but it would be shorter than that, and you would gain between, I would imagine, probably 1.2 and 1.2 down to half a metre of surveillance in with the proposed fence.
So it actually improves the passive surveillance situation?
Significantly.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Councillor Sherlock.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Lohberger actually asked my question, so I'll just make a comment later. That's all right. Thanks.
Alderman Louise Bloomfield.
The front lawn and the pavement out in front of the house, is the lawn actually higher behind the... Do you know what I mean? Does it actually... often you find that they have...
Yeah.
The ground here is this height, and then you have the fence, but it's actually hiding the fact that the ground is actually
correct.
behind. Do you have that bit?
Everyone on our side of Pavia Street has that issue. Ours is around, I would imagine, probably around 800 to a metre above street level. So the base of the fence will effectively be a retaining wall. It was initially suggested that we limit it to 1.1 metre fence by the planning department. That would give us effectively, I think I worked it out at around 80 mils of fence above the lawn.
So through you, Chair, the having the lower fence would actually be quite unsafe for small children because it's actually very low. We're not talking about quite a significant fence here. It sounds like from the debate that it's quite a tall fence, but actually it's not when you've got kids on the front lawn.
Correct. It'd be significantly lower than it is currently, and currently, to keep my kids safe, I've installed temporary builder's fencing behind the hedge because it's so overgrown, self-seeded. Unfortunately, the previous owner let it go to seed a bit, and the dogs and kids can just get out. I mean, I could get out from in the gaps at the bottom. So
that 2 rows of bricks, which is what a whole is actually a hell of a difference.
material.
Yeah, it's very material. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor.
2 questions. So currently you don't maintain the hedge?
Yeah, we do. But I mean, unfortunately, we moved in a year ago, and by that point it had gone. The inside of much of it is dead. We can't actually trim back. Well, I suppose we could from the path, but it's only living this much when we arrived, and
Yeah,
the rest of it's
yeah.
like just
No,
cactus inside.
don't worry, I hate those hedges, that's okay.
Yeah.
Yep. What's the view like from the corner? Cars turning the corner, you're on a corner,
Yeah.
so cars turning either way on the corner, would a high fence have an impact on
It would make it
cars
better.
seeing around the corner?
It would make it significantly better, because at the moment the hedge probably intrudes this much. We try to keep it neat, like we get a gardener in every sort of 3 weeks or so, but it's
Hedge keeps growing.
parts of it, yes.
You're not going to grow a different hedge.
Any other questions?
You're not gonna
Any
grow
other
one of
question,
those
I'm saying?
Silly petostrum hedges. Anyway, yeah. Look, it's tricky because I totally get the passive surveillance aspect of this. You know, when you have high fences and it's not just you, but suddenly a whole street becomes a canyon because you've got a higher fence than standard. Others have higher fences than standards, and you go around Hobart and you see how that's occurred across time, and suddenly you've got a street that's...
Councillor Harvey, would you like to ask the
okay.
question,
All
please?
right. So you
and
do
then
get
we can
the
debate all this later.
You do get the passive surveillance aspect of this, that, you know, being able to see...
Absolutely. We feel our proposal improves that.
But the hedge can go anyway.
significantly.
Anyway, sorry, okay, all right.
Any other questions? No. Thank you, Councillor. No, okay. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you very much.
Alderman Zuko.
I'm going to move for approval. I just want to advise people, and I understand Councillor Passalt's point about, sorry?
I'm just saying, put
I
my
understand
hand up.
Councillor Passalt's point about, oh, well, let's remove it by 1 brick.
Yeah.
That's 1 brick. 2 bricks. When you look at what page is it? When you look at the photo montages, and you have a real good look. If we really want to consider heritage, when I look at the house with the hedge, it's about 2. But I'll probably argue with the proponent. I think that's higher than 2.3 metres. It's covering on the Pavia Street side, it's covering the entire house. Now, isn't it about showing as much as the house as possible? And if you look at the hedge from Pavia Street, the hedge is at the eaves of the roof. If you look at the photo montage with the fence there, the hedge, the fence is far less, and you actually get to see most of the house. So if we talk about streetscape, it's actually a vast improvement on the entire streetscape of this particular house. And I think that's what we're going to take into account. It's not about whether it's 1 more brick less or 1 or 2 more bricks less. And as the proponent's already said, they've already reduced it by 2 bricks from the original design. So they've actually made compromises. If we reduce it 1 more brick, really, how massively different is that going to be to the whole proposal? I don't really see it's going to be a massive change. But what I see in the photo, I wish I could get the page number I was at. There it is there. Page 809. You actually see, I think it would be close to under or way under the windows of the house. So that's a vast improvement to the streetscape. If anyone's driven there, and I did, there are a lot of fences that are, I would say, depending on where you stand, within that height limit, and some of them are absolutely atrocious, and I don't know who approved them, but anyway, they're there. So I don't think the argument about, oh, well, we're going to approve fencing in this particular site at whatever height it is, I think 1.67 at some areas through to 2.11 or whatever it is. But you've got to also look at the demographics of the property itself. how it's situated and how the back lawn is situated and how the house is situated higher. So yes, you may measure the fence from the front of the fence, but when you jump on the back of the fence, there's a different height limit. And I would say that that if we really want to improve streetscape, this is a prime example of an improvement to the streetscape. And I'm with Councillor Harvey. Look, hedges, once they get out of shape and once they grow to a point, we're actually detracting from the heritage of the house that's behind there. And I've driven around Hobart, and I think we've all driven around Hobart, where we've seen houses, beautiful houses that have got 2 metre solid timber fences around the front of them, and one is near the corner of Augusta Road there. I drive past it all the time and I know the house that's behind there. So at least here, I think this is just going to make the house and actually make that corner. So I'm moving the conditions of approval as sent to me by the director to leave the fence in accordance to the last modification of the owner.
Councillor Schiller.
Yeah, look, I completely agree with Alderman Zuko. I was actually going to say the same thing, just the conditions that have been sent to us by the director, the proposed conditions of approval for this particular item. I completely agree. I won't reiterate what Alderman Zuko said. It's already there in the conditions of approval.
Councillor Kelly.
There's a couple of other matters I think we should consider as well. Approval, I believe, has actually gone through now for the major development immediately across the road for all the units, which was before that. Is that through you, Chair?
I understand that's been appealed to the Supreme Court, so it hasn't resolved just yet.
Regardless, in that the old Catholic tennis court area, which is a real big echoey bowl area there, the noise that's going to be coming from there with the whole habitation of that will cause significant noise in that area there, and I think this fence is going to provide a good way of sort of limiting the noise coming from that during construction and moreover when it's being built. The other thing too, it's on a slope. I do take point Councillor Harvey's comment about having these walls and that, but I think with the slope that will mitigate that to a fair degree. I think that the applicant, the owner's gone out of his way with the architects. There's really not much more this guy can do. He's bought the bricks himself, cleaned them, and gone to absolute incredible detail to improve the whole aspect of the area. And I've had four emails, I think we must have all had them too, from people supporting this as well, no objections, and really to sit here and argue about a 76mm height in one brick, reducing it, I just think is what's the word I should use? I've got to be careful these days. Yeah, I think it's not worth arguing. So I support the applicant with what's been submitted by him for the height of that wall. Thank you, Chair.
Any other comment? Alderman Louise Bloomfield.
I think one of the most pertinent things here is that that height of that fence, it's more important from his front lawn than it is from the pavement, because you've got small children. I think their safety is quite important. We don't want to force a change that means that he can't actually use that with his kids. I don't think that's what we're here to do. And I also feel too that this is exactly why we have council. It's for these small elements which don't fit precisely the rules, and we are here to say this probably does fit what the community feels is appropriate. We've had a number of emails suggesting that they feel it's appropriate for their neighbourhood. So I very much feel that he has done sufficient and that we should approve.
Councillor Louise Elliott.
Yes, I'll be completely supporting the application, and I feel for the applicant in terms of the expense and stress he's had to go to. For me, it's a no-brainer to support this.
Councillor Passol.
Thank you. Look, I'm happy to support this with the officer's attached conditions for approval. I would just point out that, within the planning scheme, there are things that are maybe a little bit more subjective, such as interpretation of the borough charter with regards to heritage, which I believe is more of an interpretive exercise than sight lines specifically over a specifically high fence to a specific window, which is pretty hard to argue with. Now, the expert advice that we have from the planners is that this fence doesn't meet the planning scheme, and we are all here to assess the fence against the planning scheme. It's not a relevant argument to bring into the debate that the existing hedge is far above the proposed hedge, because that's not what we're assessing. We're assessing what is being applied for and is in front of us this evening. Now, I recognise that there's a degree of pragmatism that needs to occur on occasion, and this wall is a lovely wall, and I do think that there is an element of consideration with regards to the level of the surfaces on either side of the fence, which does change the metrics a little bit for me. So I am satisfied that the proponent has made some concessions and worked with our planning department, and I'm happy with the recommendation for approval with the director's conditions as stipulated.
Any other? Councillor
Yes.
Harvey.
I've got to say that I'm a bit disappointed that I didn't get any emails lobbying me to support this tonight, so I mustn't be in the easy club, those who roll over.
Trying to get stuff through, I guess. But
so anyway, not that I mind. I appreciate not getting the emails. I do also want to focus on the transparency and the surveillance issues, and I take issue with Councillor Bloomfield's comment that there's small children behind the wall and this is providing safety for them. I think that's actually what the planning scheme is trying to do by having standards with regard to surveillance, with regard to that passive surveillance of the street and of the front yard. So you're suggesting that hiding the children behind a wall is much safer for them. Anyway, we'll talk about it at dinner time. But I'm going to support this. I do actually agree that this is the right thing to do, even though I would like it to be slightly lower and meet with the planning scheme, but it doesn't. But I'm also conscious that I don't want to see lots of high walls proliferating in streets across Hobart, because that does lead to a different streetscape, and it does lead to a lack of surveillance of the street. So you fall over and have a heart attack in your front yard and no one knows you're there because we've all walled ourselves in to protect ourselves from whatever. So I do appreciate the planning scheme that says we need to provide passive surveillance, that we do need to limit the height of fences, because that's an important element of having safe and secure suburbs. Walling yourself into a property doesn't help if something goes wrong and you're on the other side of the wall, and it means you're isolating yourself. And I know from knocking on doors all these years where you go up to a house and you can't get in because the front fence is locked and you can't see over the fence and you don't know what's going on behind the fence. And I think that's a poor choice to make from people, from house owners. I think you should make sure your house has a level of surveillance. That's why we have transparency through the fence of, I think it's 30%, isn't it? Yep, it's really important. So if the choice of this house owner is to build this new fence, I'll support it tonight, but it doesn't mean that I'll support this type of development all the time. And we've had high fences come to us in the past that we haven't approved, and we haven't changed the officer's recommendation. So just bear that in mind, that there's a reason for these planning scheme surveillance, passive surveillance conditions in our planning scheme, and that's to protect people who live in streets, to make sure their streets have a level of passive surveillance. But I'll support this tonight. The recommendation for approval that Alderman Zuko has moved, and I don't think we're taking off the brick, which was in the original, which was in the alternative motion. Would the director like to comment on the one brick?
Through you, Chair. So the conditions that I circulated do include a condition for removal of one course of bricks, which is recommended by the heritage officers. that still wouldn't satisfy the planning officers, but, so that's currently in the set of conditions that I provided. Perhaps we could clarify whether or not that
I
was...
did read it, I missed it. It's not to remove the brick, so I'll move it without that,
Right.
okay? Look, because I only just got it, I just read it very quickly, so I missed
Well,
it.
could we move the one course of bricks as an amendment, right, just to test the room, and then we'll go, I'll support the either way, but I just want to test the room. If there's enough people that would like to take away one course of bricks, I'll move that as an amendment.
Councillor Passau.
Thank you. Can we just clarify that the planners were not satisfied with one brick? The planners wanted to.
No.
So the planners wanted two to meet the passive surveillance conditions. We have come to the middle, and Heritage is happy with one brick off. Planners are still not super satisfied, but we have all kind of met in the middle with the single course coming off. So it's not actually about the one piece of paper that Marty is holding up. It's about two pieces of paper.
Well, let's test it
Director,
anyway,
would you like
and then
to-
you'll have your say.
Excuse me.
Through you, Chair, that is correct. The Heritage Officers recommended removal of one course. That proposed condition still did not satisfy the planners, but they have subsequently said that they would be satisfied with two courses of bricks being removed.
Alderman Zuko.
Look, I cannot support the amendment. If people are worried about breaching the so-called breach of the planning scheme, if you remove one brick, it's still technically a breach of the planning scheme because the planners want two bricks. So, I really, really ask the elected members, if you're driving past that house, if you're on the other side of the wall, and as everyone has agreed, the other side of the wall, the height factor is completely different. If that makes so much difference to this, look, please, we are improving the whole streetscape. The argument about the hedge, whether it's 2.4 metres or whatever have you, this is about the streetscape. I don't think one brick's going to change the streetscape when you look at those photos, and that's the point I'm getting at. Let's look at the benefits that this particular fence is going to do. Now, I've got photos of other fences as well that I've just been looking at, and I've got to say there are some fences that are destroying the streetscape of beautiful old houses, and this one will not destroy the house. It will improve it, and one brick's not going to make much difference to us. It's not going to improve the aspect of planning, but the proponent has already dropped it too. So, it's called meet halfway.
But I'd still move that amendment.
Thank you. So, excuse me.
I'm only speaking to you.
Yes, you speak through the chair. Thank you.
Sorry, I apologise.
That's okay. No problem. All what I'm saying is that we are now speaking to the amendment. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? Councillor Passau.
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, the issue here is that we are duty bound in this role to assess the applications against the scheme. Now, I appreciate Alderman Zuko's comment of that, well, it's not really in the scheme, so it doesn't matter how far out of the scheme it is. I don't necessarily agree or disagree with that, to be honest. But what I do consider important is that I didn't put these conditions in here. The planning department and the director put the conditions for approval in. I'm happy to see the fence built, but if we're going outside of the rules, then I would prefer that to fall on the director and the planning department than on me. I have an approval conditions that have been expertly authored, and I am happy to go with those, and it is a compromise. But if you don't include the single course removal as recommended by the director and the planning department and Heritage, then the decision falls on you, and that is outside of the planning scheme, which is for what we are here to assess items against.
Through you, Chair, can I just clarify that the planning authority would only approve this if it was satisfied that this application meets the planning scheme? You have qualified advice providing you with guidance to say that in our view, in our opinion, it doesn't meet the scheme, but you can absolutely form a different opinion that it does satisfy the scheme, and then approve with the conditions that I've provided to you.
Any other Alderman Louise Bloomfield.
I just wanted to clarify, when I'm talking about child safety, I'm talking about the ability of a kid to swing a leg over a fence and then find themselves 1.5, 1.6 metres down on a pavement, which is dangerous. And that 1 or 2 bricks height additional would actually make that difference to stop small children doing exactly that, because I believe this is a lot to do with the issue. If it wasn't to do with small children and dogs and things like that, I think it probably wouldn't matter so much. But we're actually creating a family environment here, and this is what matters. So that is why I felt it was a safety issue, and I do think that it is worthy of consideration just for that alone.
Any other one wants to speak to the amendment? I'll put the amendment then. Those in favour?
Of removing.
Yes.
Of removing the clause? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, those. Yeah. Yeah. And those against the amendment?
I'm for it, yeah. No, I'm voting no.
Can we get this clarified, please? So there's one person is voting against.
Yeah.
Four, right? The amendment. We're talking about the amendment.
Yeah.
All right. And that was Councillor Harvey's amendment.
That's correct.
All right. Okay. So one. Those against that amendment.
All of, yeah.
Right. Those against.
Alderman Zerko, Councillor Kelly, Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Overton, the Lord Mayor.
It's democracy.
Councillor
You
Elliott,
just wasted, sorry.
and Councillor Sherlock.
Just wasted 10 minutes of my life.
It's defeated. Okay. We now go back to the original. Those in favour of the original moved by.
With that,
with that
one brick out. Yeah.
One brick in.
No. Yeah, one brick in. Yeah, I want to say that no bricks out. Good. No worries. Making sure there's no bricks.
Everybody's. Excuse me, everybody. Everybody's clear. There's no bricks out, no bricks in. All right. Okay. I put that motion. Those in favour.
Aye.
Those against.
No.
The motion is carried unanimously.
No, it's not.
No.
You got one no.
Sorry, my apologies. I didn't hear that. Okay. So again, please, those in favour.
Aye.
Alderman Zerko, Councillor Kelly, Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Loberger, the Lord Mayor, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Harvey, and Councillor
And those against. Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much for your participation. And Paul, thank you for your contributions. Thank you. 6.1.2, 1 Millborough Esplanade. Anyone would like to move by the Lord Mayor? Anyone to speak to it? No. I put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Carried unanimously. 7.1, delegated decision report planning. Someone would like to move the recommendation. Any questions? No. Put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Carried unanimously. 7.2, plan.
Oh, sorry.
7.2, planning advertising. Someone move that.
Yeah.
Moved by Alderman Zuko. Those, any questions, any queries? I put the motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Questions without notice. Councillor Passault.
Thank you. Just the Director, can you provide advice on the Lord Mayor's suggestion about LPS and bike parking? But if that is in fact absent, can advice be provided to elected members about how to modify the scheme to include minimums for residential applications?
I'll take that one on notice.
Thank you. And Councillor Harvey.
Can I get a response to improving waste management systems in multi-residential developments, or creating adequate waste management systems?
Through you, Chair. So in the first application tonight, that did have a condition to require compliance with the waste management plan that has been provided.
Mm-hmm.
So is your concern to do with FOGO?
Well, yes, it is to do with FOGO, but it's also to do with the management of waste in multi-residential properties, and that it can be done adequately, because I don't think, shouldn't be talking, but I have issues with the recycling situation where people will put things in plastic bags, which means they don't get recycled. So is there an education component? Is there something that council can introduce that will improve the situation for waste management in multi-residential buildings? I'd just like to get start the ball rolling about how we improve it in time. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to do a little bit more, a slightly deeper dive on that theme. Can officers review what other capital cities are doing around food and organic waste collection and disposal in medium and high density new apartments, whether they are using the planning scheme or what particular levers they're using to ensure that food and organic waste can be separated and collected and disposed of in new apartment blocks.
Chair, I'll take that one on notice.
Any other questions? Another Lord Mayor.
I do have just a question on what is the, is it appropriate to ask, oh maybe I need to ask that in closed, but I would ask, where is the St Vincent de Paul development application, Argyle Street proposal, where's that up to?
Through Chair, that will be coming to the Planning Committee next round.
Any other questions?
No,
Councillor Passol.
Just opportunistic. Can I just note that I have a conflict for that item, so if we need a quorum, I can't assess that St Vincent de Paul item next planning.
I just have one question, and the question is with regards to the public art. In the agenda item 6.1.1, the minimum value was 1%, that came to about 240,000, I think, and it's based on the estimated cost of the development, I think, or the building. Why is it estimated and not the actual cost? Because the cost increases over time, and that 2.4 would become maybe 2 million or whatever. So I'm just asking that question.
Through you, Chair, if we have concerns, I guess at the point where we're finalising the details of the public art, then we can certainly ask for more information about that. It is a little bit difficult to quantify the estimated costs at the outset, so we give that as an indication as to what we would accept. Excuse me. That's the end of my answer.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No, thank you. Someone would like to move 9, Alderman Zuko, all in favour? Thank you. The meeting is closed. Thank you very much for those who have been